What I do now is my drawing me in and you kicking me out. Got my head spinning, no kidding. I can't pin you down. What's going on in that beautiful mind? Shout out to everyone who is celebrating the Christmas holidays. I don't celebrate Christmas, but I celebrate the festive spirit of Christmas. So I am actually getting ready to head out myself after I do this video. I did want to address this email that I received as a follow-up to our discussion relating to this 42-year-old bisexual Caucasian man who lives in the South Florida area. He expressed his sexual proclivities and interest in dominant men, particularly Black and Hispanic men. He says that he's had some run-ins on various dating sites, Grindr. He's been on Grindr. It's funny because I've heard of Grindr myself. I haven't been on Grindr. I guess from what I hear, though, it is a social networking site or a dating site designated for bisexual or gay men, right? It's not really for people like myself, heterosexual women. Though we probably could have a place there, I'm sure, but the interests are different type of tastes, right? It's more of the bisexual or homosexual type of interest on that site. So he expressed how he's been there, but currently now he's more focused on building his financial resources and building financial stability for himself. Especially after, like he says, 2 failed marriages and some dating experiences with women thereafter. From, I'm assuming, his marriages, though I realize he didn't quite answer some of my questions, but from his marriages, I would assume he produced 2 sons. So something positive, I would say, came out of his quote unquote failed marriages that he had to go through. He speaks of the last marriage as a disastrous marriage. It makes you wonder, like, what the hell? What went there? But I found that a lot of questions that I followed up with him with, he did not respond, which I find to be interesting. And especially after watching the film Freud's Last Session, you guys know I'm a psychologist, right? And I definitely am immersed in the world of psychology and studying human behavior. In that film that I just saw over this weekend, Freud himself stated that what's said is less important, and I would say less interesting, than what can't be said, right? So there's a lot to take away from that statement, in a sense that, especially in the context of social interactions and people sharing things, right? And especially when people go into depth and talking about their experiences in life, what they've gone through. But it's interesting, though, right? And what is not said. And even the thing about what's not said is something that hangs like a mist, right? It's an unseen, unheard mist that kind of hangs in the atmosphere. And you know it's there, right? Like a person who is very attuned to other people and, as it relates to communication, right? I study communication, I study human behavior, and knowing that, it's like, it's something there, right? When there's a pause or, people tend to deflect away from, people tend to divert away from certain things that are touched upon, right? And so in my response video to his emails, I asked several questions, and I noticed that he didn't go into detail, particularly relating to the mother or mothers of his children. So he has 2 sons. He says one of his sons has a disability, his oldest son. He has a younger son, and then he takes care of his elderly mother. I find it interesting also his choice of words too, as he describes, the people that he's taking care of. When he talks about his mother, he doesn't say, and also my elderly mother. He says, an elderly mother. So obviously it speaks to what he had already shared with us previously, how his mother gave him up, right? Gave him away. Those are his words, right? Gave him away to his grandmother to be taken care of. Apparently she was not fit to take care of him and provide the nurturing, the support that he needed. And he shared with us a lot, to be honest. He was relatively transparent and giving us the backdrop of his life story, right? And it makes us be able to become aware of the person that we see, right? The person that he shares with us of who he is today, right? This 42-year-old white man who craves the attention of a dominant Black man. Now, he did go to let us know that his father was absent, right? Because that was a follow-up question that I had for him to find out, where is your father in the midst of all of this, right? And he said that his father died when he was very young. I think he said it was 7 years old when his father passed away. He lost a brother to suicide. He's been through a lot, right? And he himself, through all of this, which I posed a question, right? I made a statement to say, it's kind of difficult to imagine a person who has been through so much in his life, right? How did you manage to cope with all of this? How did you get through it, right? And he admitted that, yes, he has a history of alcohol and cocaine use. So now he's saying that he is clean. He doesn't use any chemical substances, right? But then there's the addiction to sex. And I clearly see that it's an addiction. I don't know if he is at that point to admit that he has this addiction, but there's clearly a fixation on sex. And granted, me being a sex positive person, I'm the first to admit, I'm the first to say there is nothing inherently wrong with sex, right? Let's be clear. Nothing wrong with sex, but I think our relationship with sex says a lot, right? How we use sex, how we experience sex, what we do with it, right? What it looks like, how does it manifest, how does it show up, how does sex itself show up in our lives, right? The frequency, how often. It says a lot about us. And let's talk about it, right? Let's get into it. So he did send a follow-up email. So granted, this is part 3 to this discussion here. The first video I made relating to this particular topic here, relating to his story in particular, was entitled Small Penis Syndrome and White Cuckold Men, right? So that was the first video that I made, part 1. Then the second part, I followed up with a video entitled Bisexual White Cuck Unveils Dark Secret Past. So this video is the third video entitled White Submissive Male Craves Dominant Energy, Dominant Masculine Energy. And I left it at energy as opposed to qualifying or specifying to say sexual energy, though there obviously is some sexual cravings there. I say is more so generalized to be dominant energy that he craves because of the clear deficit that is present in his life with relation to paternal figure. Right? So that's a theme that we could pick apart. And for those who are new to my page, new to my videos, my channel, I have to preface this video by saying that obviously I'm a psychologist. I study human behavior. And I make these videos. I welcome people to email me directly, right, via my Gmail account, and to send me their stories, right? Send me their proclivities, their interests. And for me, this is fun. This is what I do kind of in my spare time. Yes, it is Christmas Day, December 25th, 2023. But I do this in my spare time just as a hobby, something I just enjoy doing, like in my free time, to kind of break down, to add a critical eye to people's stories, especially as it relates to alternative sexual lifestyles and experiences. Myself being sex positive, identifying myself as a submissive baby girl, right, in the context of BDSM. So yeah, I welcome it. And so this is just one of my viewers, who support my channel, watch some of my videos, and he felt comfortable enough to share his story, right? So this is the part 3 to our exchange. I'm going to read his email, and let's just jump into it, right? So he responded by saying, I actually really enjoyed this, right? And funny enough, right? So this email response that he sent, it's kind of like a 2-part response. And before he even sent the second part, which was just like a little blurb, right, with his train of thought, I already knew kind of where he was coming from just by his choice of words. Granted, this is email format, right? So of course I can't hear his voice, but I can definitely read between the lines, and I get the gist, I get the drift to see that from my last video that I made, I know he got triggered. I know it. And it's bound to happen. That's why I warn people. It's like, listen, if you are going to have a discourse with a person such as myself, like, be prepared. Just be prepared for straight kind of, sometimes it's brutal. I don't try to be brutal necessarily, but it's cutthroat. It's kind of in your face sometimes. I can be gentle at times too, but just be prepared for what's to come. And I think for some people who aren't used to a mirror being hanging in front of them, right, and showing them who they are, they find it difficult. And they have sometimes visceral reactions. They get triggered. They overreact. All right, it becomes like this situation where they get defensive. And I'm going to read this email, but I sense that from him in this email where he got defensive. And obviously, our defenses serve to protect us, serve to provide physical safety, and above that, even psychological safety. So I got that, yes, he was seeking safety in his response, and he just wanted to protect himself, right? Protect his ego, protect his own insecurities, just protect where he is at in his life from an emotional, psychological standpoint. We're all at different stages, and, that says a lot too, often when people respond in a certain way, how they respond, especially with certain defense mechanisms. So let's get into it. He says, I actually really enjoyed this, kind of almost wrapping things up, so to speak. I was like, okay. So just from that opening line right there, I actually really enjoyed this. It's kind of like him kind of putting the nail in the casket himself, right? He's kind of bringing an end to this by using it in the past tense. He says, I'll try to be as honest as possible without exaggerating. If I told you the entirety of my story, it would sound like fiction. Granted, listen, I've been exposed to many stories. You can only imagine. Through my training, through my professional experience, just through my own personal life experiences, I wouldn't say that there is nothing that surprises me, but I think there aren't too many things that are left to surprise me. He says, you were right. In 2009, when I changed my life, getting sober was a big part of that. So 2009, I think this was around the time when he was around like 29 years old, right? Before hitting the 30s, that's when he kind of started to pull his life together. Now, he did talk about obviously growing up without a paternal father figure, being raised by his grandmother because his mother was unfit to care for him. I believe he did reference the fact that she used drugs. Definitely his father was an alcoholic. His father lost his life as he describes it, to, chemical abuse. And he talks about being raised, right, as a young child, as a young boy, kind of by the older gentleman in the hood, right, in his environment where he grew up in, which he says was predominantly Hispanic. Some it was mixed, he said white, Hispanic, definitely black, right? So he had these other men, young men that he looked up to, him being the youngest at 13 years old. That was his experience, right, which then shaped his worldview. And it makes sense because, life is just a whole long parallel, right? So if we look at life through the context of psychodynamic theory, right, or essentially just looking at our present life, right, and where we are in terms of the series of events that have happened to us, right, that we've experienced, right, starting back to when we were young, we see patterns that reemerge throughout our life, right? So with him, there is a template set there with an absence of structure, an absence of consistency, of security, of stability, right? Being taken from his mom, or his mom gave him away, going to live with the grandmother. Like I said, grandmothers can do the best that they can in providing love and support, but only but so much, right? The reality is that it takes a village. It does. And it starts with the mother and the biological mother, the biological father. But, life isn't always peaches and cream, right? So he's doing the best that he can to deal with the cards that have been dealt to him. And I've said this before in a previous video that he's doing a damn pretty good job, like the circumstances in life, unfortunate circumstances, have kind of created this person in him that is a go-getter, right? That is self-sufficient, that is entrepreneurial mindset, that knows how to rise above adversity, that knows how to handle situations, right? Like, and think on his feet, right? And he gave an example of that with the whole cookout situation, and how he was the one to kind of manage everything and bring all the different moving parts together when that event was falling apart. Like he said, it was like over 200 people, but he was the one that was able to kind of pull things together, right? So he's definitely had a series of events and life experiences that he's learned from. Kudos to him. So he says, in 2009, when I changed my life, getting sober was a big part of that. I have a history of alcohol and cocaine abuse. And I figured in a sense that not that everyone who has experienced trauma or abandonment as a child, right, or neglect, I find it interesting when people, these Merry Christmas text messages just always get me, But anyway, I said that it's kind of hard to believe that a person who has experienced all of these adverse childhood and developmental experiences not have this proclivity towards substance abuse, right? Not that, it's a given, it's a guarantee that a person turns to alcohol or drugs, but there is a strong correlation, it's a strong likelihood, right? So definitely can't rule that out. And he says, in many ways, it shaped my early life. Again, there are a lot of things that he left out too, right? So what that period of his life actually looked like when he was indulging in cocaine and alcohol through his I would imagine, his teens, because most people kind of start using and abusing substances as a teenager, right, and through his 20s, late 20s, and then boom, a wake-up call happened. Like, what happened that transpired before that epiphany kind of went off and you said, you know what, I need to get my shit together. I'm not getting any younger. What was it that happened? What was that transformative event that happened that took you to that place of saying, you know what, I need to let this shit go. I need to quit using alcohol and cocaine. Something happened for you to turn away from those things, right? And for you to kind of take hold of your life and really value your life. And it takes a lot of courage, a lot of strength, a lot of discipline, self-discipline to do that. And I say this, not that, of course, I'm not your therapist, I'm not your psychologist, right? I only do this, as a means to teach. I like to analyze situations, right, and use different examples from you guys, and you also obviously remain anonymous, to share with the public, as a means to teach and to educate. But I say that in highlighting, what was that transformative event, and also pointing out your strengths, because sometimes we live life, right? Life happens to us and we forget, like, those things that we embody, like the strengths that we have, right? That you have this discipline, like, if you've done it before, clearly you're doing it now, and maintaining a sense of self-control to not respond to those sexual urges and just act on it impulsively, right? Uninhibitedly, but you say, you know what? Let me pause for a second. Let my mind lead, so that I'm not driven by this lower chakra. I'm not driven by these sexual impulses to just act. I'm pretty sure you've been there, so you learn from past experience that that's not necessarily the way to go, right? You've had your fair share of sexual, escapades or experiences that, probably were pleasurable in the moment, but then what result did it yield, right, in the end? So sometimes it's good to just take a step or a travel down memory lane to think about those things that we've overcome. How did we overcome those things, right? What was it that was in us that we possessed and that allowed us to overcome? My father died from alcoholism when I was 7 years old. I also had a brother who killed himself. I just find it interesting how he references his father's death in a very compassionate way, right? By saying that your father died from alcoholism. However, you say your brother killed himself. So you see how that energy shifts to your father being a recipient of death, like death happening to him, versus your brother taking a more active role in killing himself deliberately, right? Like, almost as if it was a crime that he committed. You say that he killed himself, right? Different ways to say a person can die by suicide, but you said that he killed himself. And we're not going to go into the details. I know this is a very touchy subject. This is your life, right, that we're talking about here. Not just your life. A lot of people can relate, have family members who have died by suicide or attempted suicide, or themselves, right, have come to a position in their lives where they no longer wanted to live, right? And then acted on those thoughts, those feelings, by trying to kill themselves. You say, I have one sister. I'm just getting all these Christmas text messages. Sweet. Who is still addicted to drinking. Excuse me, let me give me some water. All right. I have one sister who is still addicted to drinking and drugs. And I have another sister who moved away because she was abused. I don't know the whole story. There was a lot of, of course, because you were living your own life, overcoming your own battles. at that time, which kind of speaks to your disconnectedness to your siblings, to your immediate family. Um, There was a lot of domestic violence in my house. Between who? Listen, we don't have to go there. That might be too deep. That might be too deep. But clearly there is a lot of trauma that you have succumbed to, that you've been exposed to. And I'm sure, right, untreated trauma, it shows up in different ways. It manifests itself. It doesn't go away, right? It's there. Trauma is life altering, and it changes the whole trajectory of your life, right? So what a person who has a normal development in life, right? They have certain outcomes versus a person that experiences trauma, that trajectory, that life path is disrupted, right? So then they have different outcomes. And that's what you essentially are dealing with, right? And that manifests itself in different ways in terms of how you interact with people, right? In terms of your level of tolerance, your level of distress tolerance when it comes to stressful situations, anxiety-provoking situations, especially when it comes to relationships. If anything, right, is the testing ground to determine what it is a person is going through, to be able to assess, right, what a person has been through and how that has impacted them in their present. It's relationships. So oftentimes, like, what do people do who have untreated trauma? They turn away from relationships, right? They attempt, because we all have that natural inclination to be in relationships, to relate to people, to connect. That's an innate need and desire. It's there. It's not going away. But for those of us who have experienced trauma, and that you have with abandonment, right, from your father, not that it was by necessarily any fault of his own, right, but things happen, so it created these things in you, right? Abandonment, the substance abuse that, you took to, the domestic violence that was happening in your family. Poverty in and of itself is a level of trauma. The trauma that you were exposed to on the streets, right? Living that life, though you didn't call yourself a gang, but you say that your affiliation with this group of young men that you took to for guidance and love was gang-like, right? Those things that you were exposed to at that time, all of this is trauma. And it shows up, and for people who have untreated trauma and they attempt to connect with people, to relate to people, in that process, right, there are issues that arise. And you've attempted that, like you say. 2 failed marriages, right? Even after that, you had short periods of dating. Women, you talk about this ideal relationship that you had. Beautiful, athletic woman, black woman, right? Didn't quite work out. And this is a thing, because the thing is, when it comes to ourselves, right, we want to be honest. And that's what my platform is about. Like I said, it might be too heavy. People can't handle. They flee. They run away. I get it, right? When you get triggered, when we feel like our psychological safety has been threatened. Not that it's always a bad thing that your psychological safety is threatened, because it could be a healthy form, right? But you feel threatened. And you feel threatened for many different reasons. right? People pull away, they run away, they shut down, right? And that happens also in relationships. And if they don't run away, then they fight back, right? So then there's conflict, there's arguing, there's fighting. Even if it's just verbal, I don't know if there was violence in your past relationships. Could be. Because like history repeats itself, right? So there was violence in your home growing up. Like you mentioned, domestic violence. This was the way that you all communicated and interacted with each other, right? This was a template. This was a norm. So I would only imagine that that was present in your house, the very place that is supposed to be safe, right? Not that it should be perfect, right? But this was your home growing up. I can only imagine that pattern also repeated itself in your relationships with women, with your two ex-wives, right? With this ideal of a partner that, you romanticize about, you reminisce about, right? The black athletic woman. Because I did ask the question, why aren't your two children, right? Your two sons in the care of their mothers? Why are they with you? No response, right? Not that you have to answer, but listen, going back to the infamous psychoanalyst, Sigmund Freud, right? I just love that movie. Y'all can go watch it yourself. It might not really resonate with you, especially if you aren't really immersed in the world of psychology. And understanding the concept, because there's a lot of like psychological jargon that's used throughout the movie, but I loved it. But like going back to that statement, like what's said is less important than what you cannot say. You cannot say it, right? You can't say it. Why? Because that's privacy. You don't feel comfortable. That might be sharing too much information, right? So don't take it as me addressing. You're not saying it as a sign that I'm forcing you to talk. No. It's just me pointing out, like, I know, I see. I acknowledge, I see this. I'm aware, right? I'm just pointing out my awareness of what was not said and what was avoided. And it was avoided for a reason, rightfully so. And it's good, I think, that the point, and you mentioned this in an earlier email, that you're at the point where not that you're just trying to go out and get fucking bent over by any Jarrow or any Mike, right? That you can find, but you want to take some time to work on yourself. Particularly, you mentioned the way you framed it, building your financial resources, but then I added that it could be also beneficial and is most likely needed that you work on your internal self, right? Not just the outward expression of who you are in terms of how much money you can make for yourself, but work on the inside. That's the thing about therapy. Like I said, this isn't therapy, but the thing about therapy is that it serves many purposes. Main is that you get to work on those aspects of yourself that you're not quite happy with, that you've recognized, aren't necessarily up to what your full potential should be. And those aspects could be something as simple as your self-esteem. Something as simple as your sense of psychological safety and security. Something as simple as the way you communicate, right? These aspects of ourselves, especially if you've experienced trauma, have been disrupted, right? Have been stagnated, right? You become fixated in that point in development that the trauma happened. So you aren't quite fully matured in certain aspects of your development of your life, right? And then it shows up in your relationships. And yeah, it's to us by no fault of our own. But now that we're adults, right, it then becomes our responsibility. Right? It's not your fault. I'm pretty sure you've heard this and you know this. It's not your fault, but then it is your responsibility because you're an adult. And like you said before in the other email, you have a lot of responsibilities as a primary caretaker of your two children, your two sons, one with a disability, right? And then your elderly mother. And I have another sister who moved away because she was abused. I don't know the whole story. There was a lot of domestic violence in my house. As far as I can remember, I wasn't sexually abused. Now, I find that also to be interesting too, as far as you can remember. Now, that also speaks to your awareness that memories obviously can be repressed. But they also can be recovered, and that's definitely where psychoanalysis comes in. And granted, psychoanalysis, right, is a type of therapeutic approach, but it's very involved, right? So I warn people, who seek out therapy and may find themselves in a position to need something more in depth. Like, I definitely warn people to take caution because some people they're just not ready for that level of reflection. They ain't ready for that kind of mirror, right? There's different types of modalities when it comes to therapeutic approaches. There's CBT, right? Focusing on our thoughts and thought patterns and maladaptive thinking, right? And being able to identify those types of maladaptive patterns and reshaping them into something that's more healthy. And then that eventually would affect our behavior, right? And what we do. That's more on the surface though, right? And when we're talking about psychoanalysis, we're going a little bit deeper than just thoughts. It's part of it, but you're going a little bit deeper. I like to look at psychoanalysis as a type of therapeutic intervention that affects a person on a cellular level, right? We're going beyond just something that changing your thoughts, changing your mind, right? And changing your outward expression of your behavior. We're talking about going deep. And you experience like this literal physiological metamorphosis in your body when you are in the hands and care of a very effective psychoanalyst. Psychoanalysis is the approach that I've been trained in. Psychodynamic psychoanalysis and as well as family systems therapy. Those are my therapeutic approaches when it comes to working with individuals. So yeah, and it's very expensive too. It's more costly than seeing a therapist who practices CBT, right, or even DBT, the dialectical approach to therapy. So yeah, I definitely warn. Listen, take it from me. Take it as a warning. Now there are psychologists, who use certain components of psychoanalytic therapy, psychodynamic theory. You may kind of pick apart certain techniques and they use it, and you're like, listen, I can say this: when you feel something and you're just like, oh, you're in therapy, you're working with a well-trained therapist. That therapist usually, you kind of leave their office a different person or kind of thinking. If a therapist has you thinking about something that transpired in the context of a session, you're thinking deeply about it, right? That's how you know it's a good therapist. That's how you know change is happening. Sometimes people run away from that And we're going to get into that in the latter part of this email. People kind of run away. Now, granted, if your therapist is like blatantly and outwardly, let's say, disrespectful or dehumanizing or making threats, right? Like that's something that's something different, and you shouldn't really have a therapist like that, right? I wouldn't say that they don't exist, because they do exist, unfortunately, because therapists are essentially just people, right? At the end of the day, people who have invested years and money and time into training, right, to come to aid in people's recovery, right, and to enhance their well-being. That's the intent initially, but they're not perfect human beings, right? So unless that's the case, then yeah, you need to run for the door, right? But there are other situations, other circumstances, that may happen in the context of therapy that may make you feel like kind of frightened, or make you feel like your sense of psychological safety is threatened. I would say to just pause for a second and to really think deeply, right, before taking that flight approach and running away. Just something to be said there. And oftentimes for people who have endured, trauma, that trauma gets reactivated, right? That's what we call triggers. You get triggered, and a trigger is like a warning sign. It's like a red flag. It's a level of communication that says, wait a minute, there's something there. That person has endured, has experienced something that now is being reignited, is being activated by something that really has nothing to do with the trauma that they experience, right? But that is happening in the present moment is a reminder. It's not a direct connection, but it can reveal a lot, right? And so oftentimes when that happens, I like to put a pin in it. Not that we have to discuss it, we have to talk about it, but I make a mental note of that. As he says, although I thought deeply about the truth of that, like you said, as far as you can remember, you wasn't sexually abused, but it seems like there may be some indicators that you could have been, you just don't remember. And so much of your experience in life has been repressed by you doing it deliberately, right? Consciously averting away from what happened, right? Not thinking about it, just pushing it to the back of your mind. And definitely alcohol, right? And drugs, cocaine can help to detach a person from their reality, their experience, their trauma. So you don't think about it. You don't have to think about it, right? You dissociate from it by drinking. When you drink, when you use drugs, it alters your mental state. So those memories that were there, they become repressed. They become drowned out, so to speak, by the alcohol. Doesn't mean they go away. They're still there. They're still living deep down inside. They're just not being activated. You're still living in your deep subconscious mind. And that's what psychoanalysis would do. Help to recover, to resurrect those repressed memories. Like I said, I warn, be careful. Be careful what you ask for. Do you really want that? I mean, granted, like the ultimate outcome, right? The ultimate goal is to improve one's well-being, right? Quality of life, right? And to get attuned to thyself, to step back into one's body, right? And to live vibrantly. That's the ultimate goal. And then the pathway, the process by which you get there, yes, it can be pretty rough, right? And your therapist is taking this walk and this journey with you, going in the trenches with you. I said in a previous video, like, listen, I can go there. That's a video that I made when it was more so audio, right, where I had the lights out and I was recapping an experience I had at this restaurant with this guy. I'm not going to go into too much detail. You guys can go back and watch that. But I just made that video recently. And I said, like, in so many words, like, listen, I'm fit for it. I'm with the shits. I can go there. I can go to the deepest, darkest place. My experiences definitely have primed me for that. My personal and professional experiences. I've been trained to do this. And I'm with it. I'm wanting to do it. I'm wanting to go there. So, yeah, finding that person that is willing to go to those deepest, darkest depths with you. Can be very beneficial. I'm thinking because I recognize this myself, that oftentimes we turn to different things, right? Different mediums to kind of exercise and to kind of resurrect and overcome and come to face and come to terms with our dark past or our demons, right? Some people call it demons, some people call it dark past, whatever you want to call it, right? It's those inner depths, right, that we don't really want to take a look at. But we're able to kind of travel down that place through different mediums, whether it is drugs, alcohol, sex. And so much is happening, often really on a subconscious level, when you have sex, sexual energy exchange with a person. So much is transpiring. It's like, those deepest, innermost parts of yourself, right, that only you know. You share some things here, right, with us, but only that you know, you carry, and you live with. It's like those things when you have sex with another person, and this is why I say sex is spiritual, and I'm a spiritual person, and I often say this to people, they don't quite get it. It's just like, okay, sex is just sex. No, it's more than that. There's such thing as that's called soul ties, and when you're laying down, when you're having sex with another person, your soul, right, and those deepest, darkest depths that lie within your subconscious mind are being intertwined, interwoven with the same in the other person. Now, one can say that's a good thing, but that's a whole nother level of communication there. Like, let's put a pin in that. But I can see why people turn to sex. And I can also see why, in terms of when you turn to sex, look at who you turn to. Usually the people that you turn to and that you're attracted to on a magnetic level, they have something in them that matches what's in you. Almost like your level of dysfunction, right, within you matches their level of dysfunction within them. Right? It takes two. And it's good for the moment, but is it really productive? Is it really beneficial in the long run? Right? And then that's where people come to a crossroads. But I think that's interesting, though, how you say that as far as you can remember, I wasn't sexually abused, although I've thought deeply about the truth of that. And why, though? Why? Because it is often said, even research has shown, this is documented, right? This ain't just someone making an assumption. This has been documented in research where if you look at the past of men who identify as homosexual, bisexual, more often than not, you find a history of child sexual abuse there. It's not to say that all men who identify as bisexual or homosexual or gender fluid have that present in their childhood, right? It's not to say all, but there is a strong correlation that exists. He says, there's been a lot of tragedy. The crazy thing is that I survived. I'm not dead, addicted to substances, sick, or in prison. Many of my friends were not as lucky as me. My father was a weak man, but I am not. And clearly, I mean, you know your strengths. You know what lies within you. You know, the adversity that you've overcome. And that speaks to like who you are, right, as a man, because in overcoming all the shit you overcome, right, you can talk about this so confidently, so boldly. You can go in different environments, right, in different places that people who haven't been down your path, they can't step into that place so confidently like you can, right? Because you've been there. Now, back to the conversation. I felt like that was part of the conversation, right? But clearly that's not something that you find to be easy or fun to talk about. First of all, I'm totally fucked in the head when it comes to relationships. If a woman likes me too much, I lose interest. If a woman doesn't like me enough, I fall hopelessly in love. That brings us back, and I do have to wrap it up. Sorry, guys. I think I'm going to have to make this a part 2. But I do have an event to get to. I'm so sorry. I know I spent a lot of time kind of unpacking. But listen, there is a lot here to unpack. So I do apologize. But I'm glad I paid attention to the time. I'm going to have to wrap this up. But I will catch you all in the next one. There will be a part 2 to this video. I'll catch you all later. Bye.